There's a person I want you to imagine right now. She wakes up at the same time every day, drink the same coffee, take the same path to work. I smiled at the same people. They answer, "How are you?" with the same "How are you?" This person does not fight. He does not argue. He doesn't cry in front of anyone. He doesn't show anger. He doesn't show anxiety. He doesn't let it show when he's afraid. Everyone around her thinks, what a balanced person, what maturity. But do you know what's going on inside? It is disappearing. Not all at once, not dramatically. She is fading slowly, silently, like paint that fades in the rain. And no one notices, not even herself. Carl Jung spent decades studying what makes a human being truly human. And one of the most disturbing conclusions he came to was this. The person who stops reacting stops existing relationally. She is physically present, but emotionally absent. It is in the environment, but outside of life. And the scariest thing? This does not happen to people who are cold or distant by nature. It happens to people who once felt too much and learned in pain that feeling is dangerous. Maybe you know someone like that. Or maybe, and here I need you to take a deep breath, that someone is you. Because there is a very fine line between being emotionally mature and being emotionally dead inside, between having control of your emotions and having suppressed your ability to really feel anything. And most people cross that line without realizing it, and only find out the other way when they look back and can't remember the last time they felt something real. In this video, I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about reaction, presence, and belonging. I'm going to show you why your ability to react, to be indignant, to get emotional, to connect, is not weakness. It's what keeps you alive within your own relationships. And more than that, I'll show you the exact moment when people stop reacting, what happens to them when it happens, and what you can do, even today, to not become a ghost in your own story. Stay until the end, because what comes in the next few minutes may be the mirror you never had the courage to look at. Have you ever stopped in the middle of a random day and realized that you were, well, not happy, and not sad, just fine? That empty, colorless, flavorless good. The kind of good you talk about on automatic when someone asks you how you are, without even thinking about the answer. It seems calm. It feels like emotional maturity. It seems that you have finally reached that level of balance that everyone talks about but few achieve. But what if I told you that there is a huge and dangerous difference between being at peace and being anesthetized? Psychology calls alexithymia the difficulty in identifying and describing one's emotions. It's not that the person doesn't feel it, it is that she has lost the thread that connects what happens inside her to words, expressions, reactions. And the most disturbing thing, it doesn't happen suddenly. It happens gradually, almost as a natural process. So gradual that the person does not realize that he is changing. She simply wakes up one day to find that she can no longer cry in a movie that once devastated her, who no longer feels that good anxiety before a special meeting, that she is no longer indignant with the things that used to make her bang her fist on the table, and she calls it growth. Jung understood this trap better than anyone else. To him, emotional silence was not a sign of wisdom. It was a sign that something had been buried. The persona, which is the social mask that we all build to function in the world, can become so rigid, so efficient, that it begins to stifle what he called the self, the true core of the personality. And when the self is stifled for too long, it stops trying to express itself. Not because he gave up, but because he learned that it's no use. Think of a small child who cries with everything. He cries from hunger, cries from sleep, cries when he sees a beautiful dog on the street, cries when his mother leaves the room. She reacts to everything because she has not yet learned to filter. He has not yet learned that some reactions are inappropriate, immature, too much. But little by little, the world is teaching. A stop crying about it here, a you're very sensitive there, a don't exaggerate there. And the child learns. She learns that feeling too much is a problem, that reacting is inconvenient, that the best way to be accepted is to take up less emotional space, and then the silence begins. The problem is that this silence is never really silence. It's compressed noise. It is a scream that stayed so long inside that it lost its sound. And oh, but it did not lose its strength. Emotions that are not expressed do not disappear, they transform. They saw muscle tension in the shoulder that never relaxes. They saw that headache that appears every time a difficult situation arises at work. They saw insomnia, anxiety for no apparent reason, irritability with small things that shouldn't bother so much. The person who seems calmest in the room is often the one with the largest volcano inside. But that volcano has learned not to erupt. And a volcano that never erupts doesn't go away. It grows inside. There is a very simple way for you to test where you are now. Think about the last time you felt something intensely. Not only did you notice the emotion, but you actually felt it in your body. You let it move through you without trying to control it. When was that? There are days? 8 months? Are you having trouble remembering? If the answer took a long time to come, or if you came to the conclusion that it was a long time ago, pay attention. This is not peace, it's distance. And there is a fundamental difference between the two things. Peace makes you present. Distance leaves you absent. From yourself, from the people around you, from life itself. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, requires you to confront everything inside you, including what's uncomfortable, what's ugly, what you'd rather not see. Not to drown in it, but to integrate it, to make it part of your story, not a secret that you carry hidden under the bed of your psyche. The silence that feels like peace is the first sign that something needs attention. Not alarm, not panic, but of honest attention. Get the kind we rarely give ourselves. Because before you can belong to anyone else, you need to belong to yourself. And belonging to oneself begins with something simple and frightening at the same time. Learning to listen to the cry that no longer has sound. No one is born disconnected. This is important to say because many people arrive in adulthood with this feeling that they have always been like this. They have always been colder. They have always been more closed. They have always been less emotional than others. And they use that as an identity. That's just how I am. I'm not one to show it. I don't need that. But developmental psychology is unforgiving with this narrative. No human being is born with the ability to suppress emotions. This is learned. And everything that is learned has a teacher. The problem is that this teacher was rarely a malicious person. It was almost always someone who was also trying to survive the way he knew how. Let's talk about what happens in a child's brain when they express an emotion and receive indifference, irritation, or punishment in response. Her nervous system is in full development. She doesn't yet have the prefrontal cortex mature enough to process emotional rejection in a sophisticated way. What it does have is the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotions and survival, working at full throttle. And the limbic system has a very simple logic. What causes pain should be avoided. When a child cries and is ignored repeatedly, or when he shows enthusiasm and is ridiculed, when he expresses fear and is told to stop cooling, his brain makes an association that will last for decades. Expressing emotion equals social danger. And since humans are social animals that rely on connection to survive, especially in childhood, the brain chooses what feels safest. He learns to turn off, learn to filter. He learns to present to the world only what will not generate rejection. And it worked. That's the cruel part. It worked in childhood. The child who learned not to cry received less criticism. The child who learned not to show need received less rejection. The child who learned to be strong received approval. The behavior was reinforced, consolidated, automated. And the problem is that this survival mechanism, which was genuinely useful in a context of dependency and vulnerability, traveled along with the person into adulthood. And in adult life, it is no longer protection, it's prison. Because the adult who shuts down emotionally in conflict situations is not being mature. He is having the automatic response of a frightened child who has learned that feeling is dangerous. The adult who never asks for help is not independent. He is a child who has learned that needing someone is humiliating. The adult who smiles when he is destroyed inside has no emotional control. He has a defense mechanism so well trained that he no longer realizes that he is activated. Jung called these patterns complexes, constellations of emotions, memories, and beliefs organized around a nuclear, often painful experience. Anon complexes have a frightening characteristic. They operate autonomously. You don't decide to turn them on. They activate themselves in situations that the unconscious associates with the original experience. That's why you can be completely rational in 99% of situations, and suddenly, in an argument with your partner or in a criticism from your boss, react in a way that you don't understand yourself later. Because it wasn't the adult who reacted, it was the complex. And the price paid for this chronic shutdown is too high to ignore. In the body, research in psychosomatics shows that chronically suppressed emotions increase inflammatory markers in the body, compromise the immune system, raise levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and are associated with cardiovascular diseases, gastrointestinal problems, and chronic pain with no apparent organic cause. The body charges what the psyche does not process. In relationships, the person who disconnects emotionally creates an invisible field of distance around him. People feel it, even without being able to name it. They feel that there is a glass between them and you, that you are present but not available, that can talk to you but not really connect. And over time, they stop trying, not out of malice, but because connection requires reciprocity, and when reciprocity does not come, the human instinct is to withdraw. In identity, perhaps the highest price of all, the person who spends years disconnected from their emotions loses access to a fundamental compass. Because it is emotions that tell us what matters, what hurts, what makes us feel alive, what makes us feel dead. Without them, decisions become calculations, relationships become arrangements. Life becomes a sequence of tasks performed competently, but without presence. And one day that person looks back and realizes that he lived a lot, but felt little. Switching off was the solution you found when there was no other. But now there is. And the first step is to recognize that the switch exists and that you have the power to start ringing it again. There is a psychological phenomenon called depersonalization. In its clinical form, it is a serious condition that needs specialized monitoring. But there is a more subtle, more everyday version that never appears in diagnostic manuals. And that affects a huge number of people without them realizing it. It's the feeling of watching yourself from the outside. To participate in situations, but not to be in them for real. To say the right things, to make the right moves, to appear in the right places, but with the strange impression that he is an actor in a play he did not write. Have you ever felt that? Not necessarily as a dramatic experience. Sometimes it's just that feeling of being in an important conversation and realizing that a part of you is on the outside, evaluating what you say before you say it, calculating how you're going to be received, monitoring your own facial expression, or to be in a moment that should be beautiful, a celebration, an expected date, a sunset that anyone would photograph, and not be able to simply be there. There is always a part of you that observes, analyzes, compares, questions. On this divide between what you live and what you feel when you live is one of the quietest and most devastating effects of chronic emotional suppression. When a person learns over the years that their natural reactions are inappropriate or dangerous, they develop what psychologists call a hypertrophied observer ego, a part of consciousness that is permanently in surveillance mode, monitoring and filtering everything before it reaches the outside world. In the beginning, this is useful. It is what allows you to adapt behavior to the social context, which is an important skill. But when this observer never shuts down, when he is present even in the most intimate and private moments, he begins to steal something precious: spontaneity, the presence, the ability to simply be without monitoring oneself. And what happens to relationships when you become a character in your own life? They are superficial. Not because the people around you are superficial, but because you're never fully there. You offer the edited, revised, approved version of yourself, and people respond to that version. They like it, maybe they even admire it, but they don't really know you. And deep down, you know it. And this particular loneliness, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who like who you pretend to be, is one of the most painful there is. Because she doesn't have an easy name. It is not abandonment. It is not rejection. It is voluntary invisibility. Jung talked a lot about the difference between the persona, the social mask, and the self, the real being. For him, the problem was not having a persona. Everyone has it, and everyone needs it. And the problem was when the persona became so thick that the person lost his way back to himself, when she no longer knew where the mask ended and where it began. And there is a very specific symptom of this that few people can name: the difficulty of receiving real affection. The person who has become a character in his own life can receive praise for performance, results, appearance, competence. But when one looks at her with genuine affection, not for what she does, but for what she is, there is immediate discomfort, a desire to look away, a joke to break the tension, a minimization. Because to be truly seen requires to be truly present. And being truly present is exactly what became dangerous a long time ago. The cruel paradox is that this person often stands out socially. She is articulate, competent, pleasant. People are looking for it. It seems to be well inserted. But inside there is a specific exhaustion that is not caused by work or lack of sleep. It's the exhaustion of always being on, of never being able to let your guard down, of never knowing for sure what it would be like to be you, without an audience, without evaluation, without the approved version of yourself. Returning to being the protagonist, not the character, of one's own life begins with a small and radical gesture at the same time. Stop editing oneself at least at one point in the day, letting an emotion pass without judging it. Say what you think to someone you trust without calculating the reception. To remain silent without trying to fill it with the performance of those who are well. These gestures seem insignificant. But for those who have spent years watching themselves from the outside, they are acts of courage. This is going to hurt a little, but it needs to be said. There is a moment, rarely visible, never announced, when the people around someone emotionally absent make a quiet decision. It is not a conscious, planned, malicious decision. It is an instinctive, almost animal-like response to the pattern that has been established over time. And that decision is, stop searching. They stop telling the news first. They stop calling when they are unwell. Stop sending that "I remembered you" message. They stop making the invitation that they know will be refused or accepted with that enthusiasm that seems rehearsed. People are gradually redirecting their need for connection to those who are available. Really, not just physically. And the most painful, those who are in the know of this process rarely realize that distancing has already become the norm. This is not cruelty of people. It's physical, emotional. Human connection works as a two-way street. When you share something vulnerable with someone, and that person welcomes, mirrors, responds with presence, a circuit closes. There's a real neurological satisfaction in this, mediated by oxytocin, the hormone of social attachment. But when you share something and get back distance, a change of subject, a practical piece of advice when you just wanted to be heard, or that polite smile that doesn't reach the eye, the loop doesn't close, and the brain learns, as it always does, here it is not safe to open up. The emotionally absent person often does nothing wrong in the explicit sense. He didn't hurt anyone openly. It wasn't rude. It wasn't cruel. It just wasn't really there. And this, over time, has the same practical effect as active removal. There's a concept in relationship psychology called perceived responsiveness. The perception that the other person sees you, understands you, and cares about your well-being. Research shows that this is one of the most determining factors for the quality and durability of any intimate relationship. Non-agreement, non-compatibility of tastes, not even time together. It's the feeling of being seen. And you can't make someone feel seen if you're not present enough to see it yourself. There is a specific thing that happens in friendships when one side is emotionally closed. At first, the friend on the other side tries. He insists, question, make room. But there is a limit to how much a person can give without receiving it back. Not out of selfishness, but out of health. Unilateral relations drain. And when it drains too much, the instinct for self-preservation speaks louder. In love relationships, the effect is even more pronounced. The partner of an emotionally absent person usually goes through a very predictable cycle. First, he tries harder. He believes that it is still a lack of openness, that over time he will change. Then he begins to question himself. Is it me? Am I not enough? Am I asking too much? Sometimes he spends years in this cycle of doubt and trying before finally protecting himself, either by leaving the relationship or by closing themselves off as well, creating two parallel worlds that coexist in the same space without ever really touching each other. And all this happens not because there was a lack of love, but because love alone cannot cross a wall that the person on the other side has built so carefully over so long. Belonging, that deep sense of belonging, of being needed, of having a place in the world of the people you love, isn't automatic. It is constructed and maintained by small acts of presence and reaction. A genuine how great when someone tells you good news. A voice that changes tone when the conversation gets serious. A silence that welcomes instead of uncomforting. A question that shows that you were really listening. These are reactions, small but fundamental. And when they stop, belonging goes with them. Not all at once, but it will. The good news, and there is good news, is that this process is reversible. When relationships that have cooled due to emotional absence can be reheated by emotional presence, not for the grand declaration, not for the dramatic gesture, but for the consistent return to real availability, for reacting again, for letting people know with your answers that you are there, for real, not just in body. Do you remember a situation where someone said or did something that hurt you deeply and you didn't say anything? Maybe he smiled. Maybe he changed the subject. Maybe he said okay when he wasn't okay at all. Maybe I left there with that knot in my stomach and thought, it's not worth it. It will pass. I'm not one to create drama. Where did that go? This is a question that psychology takes very seriously. And the answer is uncomfortable. Because the answer is, that didn't go anywhere. It's there. Not exactly as it was at the time it happened, but transformed, compressed, stored in a way that the body and mind keep paying for. Psychologist Peter Levine, one of the world's leading researchers of trauma and stress, has spent decades studying what happens to emotions that don't complete their natural cycle of expression. His conclusion was revolutionary and at the same time very simple. The nervous system does not distinguish between I chose not to react and I was prevented from reacting. In both cases, the energy that has been mobilized for the reaction, anger, fear, sadness, indignation, does not dissolve. It is circulating in a state of readiness, waiting for an exit that never comes. This has a name, unresolved emotional charge, and it manifests itself in ways that we rarely associate with its origin. That exaggerated irritability that appears in small situations, the glass out of place, the traffic stopped, a word in the wrong tone, is often not about the glass, the traffic, or the word. It is the accumulated pressure of dozens of swallowed reactions that has finally found a small enough outlet not to seem exaggerated. The nervous system charges where it can, not necessarily where it should. Chronic anxiety with no apparent cause is another classic manifestation. The body is on alert, but the mind cannot identify danger. Because the danger is not present, it is past. These are unprocessed emotions that the nervous system continues to treat as active threats, keeping the organism in a state of constant vigilance without there being anything concrete to face or escape. And there is something more subtle and perhaps more destructive: resentment. Resentment is what happens when hurt is not expressed, is not elaborated, is not communicated, but is not forgotten either. It sits there in a layer below the surface, coloring every interaction with that person or with anyone who somehow remembers them. And resentment has a particular characteristic. It grows in darkness. The longer it goes without being named, the more space it takes up. And he begins to create narratives. He begins to reread the past, finding in each memory new evidence that the hurt was justified, that the person never paid any attention, that he will never change. Jung talked about what he called the shadow, the part of the psyche that contains everything that has been rejected, suppressed, denied. And one of the things that feeds the shadow the most are exactly these unexpressed reactions. Because what you can't feel consciously doesn't go away. It migrates into the unconscious, and from there you operate with much less supervision and much more power. The shadow is not necessarily something negative in itself. Jung was clear on this. It also contains vital energy, creativity, strength, desire, all of which have been suppressed along with the unacceptable emotions. The problem is when it gets too inflated, too loaded, without any channel of communication with consciousness. In this case, it begins to emerge in ways that the person does not recognize as his own. Projections on others, seemingly meaningless outbursts, repetitive patterns of behavior that he himself does not understand, and relationships that always reproduce the same painful dynamic. There is a phrase that appears in different forms in various therapeutic traditions, from Jung to Gabor Mate. You can try to run away from the pain, but it will find you anyway, only at another address. The reaction you swallowed in that meeting became the headache that appears every Monday. The hurt you didn't communicate to your partner turned into the coldness he feels but can't name. The anger you kept at your father turned into disproportionate intolerance with authority figures that appear in your life. Not in a linear way, not in an obvious way, but consistently, repeatedly, inevitably. The way is not to blow up everything that was damned. It is not to turn every unexpressed reaction into a difficult conversation or a confrontation. It is something more subtle and deeper. It is learning to give repressed emotions an internal space of recognition. Name them. Feel them without judgment. Sometimes communicate them when it is safe and when it serves the relationship. Sometimes to process them in other ways. Movement, writing, creative expression, therapeutic accompaniment. The central point is simple. The emotion needs to go somewhere, and you can choose where before she chooses for you. We have come to the most important point and the most delicate, because when someone spends years, sometimes decades, disconnected from their emotions, the idea of feeling again can feel both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because there's a part of you that knows something is missing, a terrifying because you don't know what you're going to find on the other side, and part of you suspects it might be too much to take. This suspicion needs to be named before anything else. It is understandable, but it is not true. The idea that, if I open this door, I'll drown, is one of the most common beliefs among people with chronic emotional suppression, and it's exactly the kind of belief that fear creates to stay in place. Because fear is a protection mechanism, and protection mechanisms, even when obsolete, do not give themselves away easily. The truth that psychology has repeatedly demonstrated is that emotions, when they find space and security, do not drown. They pass. They have a beginning, middle, and end. What drowns is not the emotion itself, it is the resistance to emotion. It is the energy expended in maintaining the dam that tires and sickens, not the emotion that it represses. That said, the path back to yourself is not a turning point. It is not a decision made in an afternoon that transforms everything. It's a process, and one that deserves to be treated with the same seriousness and patience that you would give to any real learning. The first step is the simplest and most resisted: appointment. Name what you are feeling, even if imprecisely, even if the word is not accurate. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research shows that the richer a person's emotional vocabulary, the better able they are to regulate their emotions in a healthy way. Not because naming is magical, but because naming activates the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, in dialogue with the limbic system, the emotional part. Watch, this dialogue is what allows the emotion to be processed rather than suppressed or dominated. So it starts simple. At the end of the day, before going to sleep, an honest question: what did I feel today? Not what happened, not what I did, what I felt. And he stays with this question in no hurry to answer it well. The second step is to track the reactions in the body, because emotions, before being thoughts or words, are physical sensations. Anger is heat in the chest and tension in the jaw. Fear is tightness in the stomach and short breath. Sadness is a weight on the shoulders and slowness in movements. Joy is lightness, expansion, a kind of inner glow. When you learn to recognize emotions through your body before you try to process them through your head, You create a powerful shortcut back to yourself. Well, that's what practices like mindfulness, somatic meditation, and body therapy work on. Not as fads, but as reconnection technologies that have a solid neuroscientific basis. They teach the nervous system to tolerate the presence of emotions without collapsing. And over time, the nervous system learns that feeling is safe. The third step, and perhaps the most difficult, is to practice the dosed vulnerability, not with everyone, not all at once, but pick at least one relationship, a person you trust, and allow them to see something real about you. A worry you would normally hold, an insecurity that I would normally hide behind a joke, a I'm feeling this way and I don't really know why. This gesture has a double effect. On the one hand, you begin to test and often discover that being truly seen doesn't destroy you, or nor does it destroy the relationship. It often strengthens you in a way you've never experienced. On the other hand, you begin to create new evidence for your nervous system. That connection is secure, that presence is possible, that you can be here, for real, without being destroyed by it. Jung had a central belief that runs through all of his work. The human being has a natural tendency toward totality, not to perfection, to the totality, which is different and much more real. Wholeness means integrating the parts of you that have been denied, not eliminating them. It means making peace with your anger, with your fear, with your need for affection, with your ability to hurt yourself. Not so that these parts control you, but so that they stop controlling you behind their backs. Because that's what happens when you stop reacting. And our emotions don't go away. They stay, but they go behind the stage. And from there, out of their sight, they continue to direct the show. To feel again is, essentially, to return to driving. It's recognizing that your emotions aren't weakness, they're information. That reacting isn't about losing control, it's about being present. That belonging begins long before anyone else. It begins with the act of belonging to oneself, of inhabiting one's own experience with honesty and with kindness. The day you stop reacting is the day you stop belonging. But the reverse is also true. The day you choose to react again, with your mistakes, your excesses, your entire imperfection, is the day you come back to yourself. And that's perhaps the most important step you can take today.